What inspired you to write your book?
I always wanted to be a writer. Like when I was your age, I wanted to write books and I wanted to tell stories. So I guess I've always been inspired to write.
Do you have a specific writing style?
Well, I write poetry. I've always written poetry even as a little kid. And I've also been a copywriter my whole life, which means that I've written marketing copy to sell things. So I think my style is kind of a combination of those two things. I like to write kind of poetically, but I also like to really keep things exciting.
Was there any author that was your mentor?
Well, I have two, actually. I have two really favorite authors that I would love to not emulate, but have always inspired me. And that's E.B. White, who wrote Charlotte's Web, which you've probably read. And he also wrote Stuart Little. And then when I got a little older, I really, really like Tolkien. I think The Hobbit is my favorite book of all time. So I guess it'd be those two.
If you had to do your book all over again, would you change anything in your life?
Wow, that's a really good question. I've never even thought of that. I guess a writer would probably always look back and think, there's a few things I could have done differently. I guess if I was going to redo anything in the story, I would maybe tell more of the history of the man who made them, the mysterious stonemason. Maybe. Well, it's a good question, though, James.
How did you come up with the title?
Yeah, the title is a really important thing. You have to make sure that it says the right thing about the book and, is interesting. There's a first book in the series. This is actually the second book in the series called the Last Gargoyle series, and the first book is called The Gargoyle at the Gates. So I wanted to kind of keep that idea, the gargoyle something. So that's why we came up with the gargoyle overhead. And the story is really about Amberjean. That's a big part of the story. The second gargoyle who's flying around the city, around Toronto, looking. So she's overhead in the whole story.
Message in the novel that you wanted readers to kind of see?
Is there a message that I wanted to see, like what maybe a main theme is? That's a good question. There's a lot of themes, but I think the main story that I wanted to get across was that friends are really important. And being a loyal friend, really being courageous and sticking together and looking out for each other is one of the most important things you can do as a friend. I think that's probably the main message.
Do you have to travel much, like, for your books?
As an author? Well, as you get going in your career, you do get to go to more events. I'm really, really honored to be invited and to be part of the Forster Reading this year. So that's a big travel for me, although I do live nearby. And I'll be going to Ottawa. So yeah, and you travel around the city and you travel to local areas. Yeah, some writers go all around the country.
How did you choose what to write your story about?
How did I choose to write about gargoyles? Well, one day I was in an antique store, an old store with old things in it, and I had my children with me who were about 10 and 9 then, and I was looking at this funny kind of stairway, and I went over to the stairway and I looked up the stairway, and on each stair was a gargoyle, just like this one. And I looked away, and when I looked back, it looked like each gargoyle had moved a little bit. So that was the spark of the idea for writing about gargoyles. And then I told a bedtime story to my children for a couple of nights, and then it kept going and going. And my daughter finally said, Mom, you should write that down. So that was how the gargoyle story started.
Do you have another job other than writing?
Yeah, I write copy. I'm a copywriter for magazines. So I help to sell magazines to people, and I write for fundraisers too. So companies that are trying to raise money. So I write all day, every day.
You write in the pieces, or like write the story first and then do like end it, or do you just write it?
That's a really good question. So what the process is? I mean, how you go through being a writer? Well, I try to write every day for a few hours, and I try not to. The first time I write something, I try not to stop. I just try to write something all the way through, and that can take a long time. You know how long time? Guess how long it takes to write a book? What if that book of mine that you're reading? Just take a guess.
7 months.
That's a good guess. It was about a year. So that's the first draft, takes about a year. But you try not to stop yourself. So, yeah. And you go back and edit it afterwards.
What do you do when you're not writing?
I try to exercise, and I try to hang out with friends, and I travel a little bit, and take care of the family.
How do you get your books published?
Well, I'm really lucky in that I found a really good publisher named Dundurn, and it was Napoleon before that. And you have to really try. You have to keep trying hard. You have to keep sending your books out. As a manuscript, you just keep sending it and sending it. And sometimes you'll hear no, you can't do it, and then keep trying. You'll find someone that says yes, we'll publish it for you.
Yeah, that's all.
Thank you, James. Do you want to introduce our friend?
Sure.
This is Gargoyle, our channelist, and thank you to Peyton for taking the video. And I'm Phillippa Dowding. Thanks a lot for coming this morning. Those were really good questions.